Shalom uvracha, and thank you so much for clicking on this video to learn a little bit with me. B'siyata d'shmaya. I want to thank Finding Light Through Loss, this incredible organization, for the opportunity to learn with you about the topic of grief, the topic of loss, this experience that we invariably have sometime along the journey of life, where we find ourselves in excruciating and incalculable pain. And I want to commend all of those responsible for putting this incredible project together, for creating a resource that's so absolutely necessary for Jews all around the world to be able to find content that can address what they're going through so that they understand they're not alone. And there is no such thing as falling out of the realm to which the Torah speaks, that the Torah can still address. There's Torah for these experiences, just like there's Torah for all of life. And so here in one place, we can find messages of comfort, messages of hope, messages of understanding, compassion, and guidance. What a privilege. And of course, it should all be in the schus, la'aliyas neshama, and in loving memory of Shalamis Bas Ephraim B'Tzalel. The neshama should have an aliyah. So the first thing that I want to address is the topic of grief. After a person experiences loss, any kind of loss, but specifically the loss of a loved one, and maybe even more specifically, when that loss is under tragic circumstances, Rahman al-Itzlan, the experience is entering into a darkness that words fail to describe, a darkness that we can't even qualify or quantify, find the ability to express to others what we feel. Like entering into an endlessly pitch black tunnel that never seems to break again into the light. Grief. The first thing I want to open with is the Torah's allowance for each and every Jew to feel what they're feeling to the fullest extent without needing to quickly jump to find some kind of concept that we can categorize what we're feeling into so that we can make it all better and carry on. The Torah understands human beings are human beings. We're meant to be human. And part of the human experience is sometimes feeling so overwhelmed and so absolutely overcome with darkness that no light can break through into that circumstance. And sometimes that's perfectly fine. Sometimes it's okay to allow ourselves to experience the full extent of what we're experiencing without finding a way to quickly make it all better. There is a time period where we need to experience the fullest extent of the grief and the pain and be inconsolable. And that's part of the consolation, just to know that that's okay. There's validation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the human being with this nature, that this is our knee-jerk response. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we feel like we're climbing up a wall of ice and just, clutching for anything that can give us some sense of stability, a foothold, and nothing works and nothing helps, and we're just falling and falling and falling. Give yourself space for that experience. The Torah gives us space. The Torah doesn't demand that we find words all the time. The Torah doesn't demand us that we quickly utilize one of the concepts of the Torah itself to provide us with the comfort that we seek. Sometimes it's okay to sit with a gigantic question mark, the echoes of which fill all of our capacity for thinking, the past, the present, the future, all of space, to be in a state of tohu, to be in a state of bewilderment and bohu, wondering what is the content of what I'm feeling. I just have never felt this way in my life, and I can't see a way out. Sometimes the Torah says, it's okay. It's okay. Tohu v'vohu, tola eretz al blima. Sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu hangs our world on nothingness. And we can't identify the Yaakov Chevel Nachalaso, the rope that we can grasp to climb back up and get back to where we think we should be. Sit with it. Sit with it. That itself can be a spiritual exercise. We're chelek elokam yimal. We're tzelem elokim. We're precisely how we're meant to be. And so if this is the knee-jerk natural human response, let yourself be okay with that. I think this is hinted to in what Moshe Rabbeinu experiences when he sees a vision of Rabbi Akiva, the great Tana Rabbi Akiva, the Rebbe of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. We have no capacity to understand the depth of this individual, the righteousness, the piety, the incredible holiness of Rabbi Akiva, Schusi Yagan Aleinu. And Rabbi Akiva, as we all know, we read this on Yom Kippur, we read this on Tisha B'Av, in the Kinos. Rabbi Akiva experiences the most gruesome, miserable death at the hands of the most ignorant and ruthless individuals, the most wicked and coarse humans, perhaps in history, a culture of wickedness. And at their hands, Rabbi Akiva suffers the most miserable, miserable torture that can be imagined. His skin is scraped off. And Moshe Rabbeinu confronts the Master of heaven and earth. Moshe Rabbeinu demands an answer. Moshe Rabbeinu begs God to gift him with a concept so that he can somehow contextualize this feeling, this incredible sense of doubt, this void that seems endless, that opens up in the heart and soul of no less than Moshe Rabbeinu when he sees the greatest evil being perpetrated upon the greatest good. Rabbi Akiva, Masreka Shal Barzel, scraping his skin off in this incredibly, miserably ruthless way. And Moshe Rabbeinu asks, Zu Torah v'zu schora? This is the appropriate reward for a person like Rabbi Akiva? Tzadik viralo? Is it possible that such a righteous person should experience in return such evil? Tzadik viralo? So does HaKadosh Baruch Hu quickly jump to deliver all kinds of fancy theories, which we're actually going to get to in the context of this talk, because I don't know who's watching it, and you may be at a point where you're ready to hear some concepts. But for those of us who aren't, and that's stage one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't jump to gift Moshe with words that can clarify, that can explain. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at Moshe and he tells him, Shtok. Silence. Moshe Rabbeinu, I want you to enter yourself into the experience of silence. The premise of which is that there are no words that are capable in the realm of words, in the realm of ideas, that are powerful enough to gift the human mind with the comprehension that would allow us to be okay. Sometimes we experience pain that can only be responded to with this silence, without looking for concepts and ideas, just to feel the full extent of it without any words at all. Just to be in that experience, to feel the extent of the pain, and to comfort ourselves by knowing that that's okay. It's not a higher madrega to quickly jump to find in a sefer on Emunah some idea that will help us understand. No, it's really whatever Hashem does is for the best, and so on and so on. We all know that that's true. But there is a time period where in response to loss, the first response is just shtok. Be okay with feeling the extent of the pain. Validate what you're feeling by remembering that maybe in that stage there are no words that could ever do away with this yearning, with this sense of loss, with this sense of purposelessness, of meaninglessness, of utter confusion, where we can't move and we don't know whether there's any purpose in gathering our strength and carrying on. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, shtok, respond to this not with words, but with silence. Kach Allah b'machshava. Those are the next three words in the Gemara. Kach Allah b'machshava. How do we literally translate those words? So it arose in the divine mind. Kach Allah b'machshava. Which means to say, Hashem says, listen, I have a plan. This is how it arose in the infinite wisdom of the master of the world, which is so beyond us, which we'll address in a number of minutes. Kach Allah b'machshava. And that's how you understand the Gemara on a literal level. But the tzaddikim explain that it's deeper. Because where does this impulse for us to be able to find a way to categorize our experience in a way that we can understand, where does that come from? That comes from our sense that perceives a necessity to be in control of a given situation. We don't like feeling completely out of any kind of sense of control. It's an incredibly vulnerable experience, and we try as much as we can to give ourselves an illusion of control. And the way that we do that is by thinking that we can think, and thinking that we can understand, and thinking that we're able to know. So Moshe Rabbeinu wants to fit a concept into his mind, to be able to look down at what's going on and to get it with his human consciousness, with his capacity to understand. Hashem, give me something. Give me some way of understanding this. Tzadik v'tovlo, viralo, Rasha v'tovlo. How can I understand all the mysterious things in the world that make me feel so vulnerable when I can't comprehend how this can be good in any way, shape, or form? HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at Moshe Rabbeinu and he says, Moshe, sometimes the experience of loss, the most intense feelings of pain and brokenness and darkness and loneliness, are opportunities to transcend the way of thinking that makes us think that we're ever capable of really understanding or controlling anything. And that's a gift. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, shtok, silence. Kach Allah b'machshava. Not so it arose in the divine mind, but Moshe Rabbeinu, sometimes the secret of responding to tragedy, to loss, to pain with silence. Kach is the way that Allah b'machshava. You can move beyond that lower limited human consciousness that scrambles for some sense of control, that scrambles to make sense of things. Hashem says, I'm opening up a black hole that seems endless to grant you a portal through which to glimpse the truth that ein lanu al mi lehishaein ela al Avinu shabashamayim. The truest reality that we are absolutely categorically not in control. Now, it's hard to live life like that on a day-to-day basis. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in such a way where we have Bechira and where it's Tzelem Elokim, and we're able to do so much and control so much and change so much through our tefillas and through our shtadlus and the whole spectrum and the gamut of the range of human experience. And that's how Hashem wants it to be. But underlying that needs to be this deeper awareness that we're all just puppets in the hands of the puppet master. And sometimes Hashem is gifting us with the capacity to move in to that experience of total and utter helplessness, where we just feel lost. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, good, shtok, sit with the silence. Sit with the not knowing. Sit in a place that goes beyond concepts. Divest yourself of the human need to understand. Go beyond. Go beyond. Be okay with knowing that you don't know, that you cannot know, that you're right to feel like there's no answer, because there isn't. Not for you, not for the human being. Sit in the experience of grief, overwhelmed by the darkness, and remember and understand that all the while that we're humans, there are going to be some questions that do not have an answer from our perspective. They are unanswerable. And so when we feel that way, it should be validated. And there's a gift here. Because in so doing, in that silence, in that awareness that no matter how profound our conceptual thinking and philosophical thinking and theological thinking might be, however far our brains can reach, ultimately we run up against a brick wall. We run up against the dividing barrier that stands eternally between the consciousness of the Creator and the fragments of His consciousness that He gifted to human beings. Huge dividing wall. And Hashem says, when you sit in this silence, when you utilize this opportunity to enter into a state of bittul, something deeper is taking place. Kach Allah b'machshava. In this circumstance, we have the rare gift of being able to reinforce the deep, most fundamental knowledge of all, which Rabbi Nachman of Breslov describes in a sentence, Tachlis hayediyah, the pinnacle of knowing is asher lo neda, is knowing that I cannot know. And that goes beyond all concepts. Shtoik, when we sit with our silence, without scrambling to find a way to rationalize and to justify and to understand and how this is really all okay, and no. When I allow myself to feel the full extent of the pain without being mitaretz, without trying to answer it, shtoik, sit with the silence for as long as it takes. Kach Allah b'machshava. What I'm accessing in that moment is a realm that goes beyond my sense of control, where I'm finally able to just let go and to feel the vulnerability of not being able to know. Oh, that's difficult for the human. But that means that we're growing. It's an opportunity to grow. You know, there's a famous Torah, a famous teaching from the Kotzker Rebbe. The Heilige Zisa Kotzker, one of the great early Hasidic masters, the Kotzker says, we all know that the Nachash, the primordial snake in the Garden of Eden in Gan Eden, was cursed for having seduced Adam and Chava into the lower realm of understanding, the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, where they couldn't live in a state of bittul, in a state of nullification like we just mentioned, the state of not knowing. They wanted to know. And they became so much lower because they wanted a sense of control. V'yisim kelikim. So when that snake is punished, one of the punishments is that its food will be dust. Dust. It will be walking on its stomach. It will lose its legs, or slithering rather on its stomach, and it will be eating dust wherever it goes. So the Kotzker Rebbe asks, I don't understand. Why is that a curse? How is that a curse to always have food? Okay, I get it. It's not so tasty. And none of us want to eat dust. And we're blessed with a great gamut of different tastes and a variety of different foods. But in as much as this is the fitting food for this particular species, why is it a curse? It's such a blessing. It'll have food wherever it goes. What a blessing. How is that a curse? So the Kotzker Rebbe says the deepest thing. Rav Hutner put it this way. Prayer is not to get us out of trouble. Trouble is to get us into prayer. So it's not that, really we wouldn't ever have to pray, but then a horrible thing happens. We got to pray to get out of the trouble and out of the bind and the difficulty and the challenge that we're experiencing. It's on the contrary. The main thing is not getting out of the trouble. The main thing is the prayer. And in order to compel us to pray, sometimes the Master of Heaven and Earth brings trouble into our lives, to disturb the waters, to wake us up. So the Kotzker Rebbe says, sure, it's a blessing to have dust wherever you go if that's all you need to sustain yourself. It's easy because it's the most common thing. You'll find it wherever, so you have food wherever you go. That would seem to be a blessing. But the Kotzker Rebbe says, you know what isn't a blessing? That if you always have whatever you need wherever you go, you have no catalyst to reach out, to contact the realm beyond, to hold up your hand, to request from the divine being from whom all life comes forth. If everything in life always goes the way that it seems that we understand it to need to go, then it might be enjoyable. But what we lose out on is this being pushed, forced into the darkness of an experience that requires us to respond with this dark silence of shtok that leads to kach Allah b'machshava. HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving the Nachash everything means that he took away from the Nachash the most important thing, which is an opportunity to transcend itself. An opportunity to channel a light that is beyond itself, consciously. To choose to submit, to choose to feel the full extent of our true vulnerability as created beings that are not privy to the full extent of the master plan. That was the curse of the Nachash. It never had trouble. But because it never had trouble, it never had prayer. There are some people that don't go through deep experiences of loss, that don't understand, that wouldn't understand the words that I'm speaking about. Endless darkness, feeling like we can't move, a pit in our stomach, everything is meaningless, we can't carry on, and etc., etc., etc. Those people that have no grief, even though at some point or another, every person will experience some level of this. People like that also never have the opportunity to experience the deeply, deeply important sense of silence that is the only ticket to truly transcending our limitations, to truly letting go to let God. They won't have grief, but neither will they have this gift of sitting with a visceral experience, not jumping to find a way to address it so that we can fit it into our brains and feel like, okay, now we're back in control because we know which box this goes into, and then we can shut the lid and put it away and carry on. Silence. Just sitting with it. That's the gift that the Master of Heaven and Earth gifts us and implores us not to quickly jump to find a way of understanding it, but to sit with the awareness that I will not understand it. And that's the truth. And to use that as a portal, kach Allah b'machshava. And this is all captured in a verse in Tehillim where David HaMelech, King David writes, Tashev enosh ad daka. It's the way of the Master of the world. Tashev enosh, to push the human being, ad daka, which literally translates as into paucity or poverty. And the Gemara darshans, the Gemara explains and expounds, ad daka, what is this word poverty? What kind of poverty are we speaking about? Are we speaking about finances? Are we speaking about poverty of one's health? What kind of poverty does God push men into? And the Gemara says, Tashev enosh ad daka ad dichducha shal nefesh. God finds a way to engineer it in our lives that all of us at one point or another and to varying degrees will experience what's called dichducha shal nefesh, the poverty of our spirit, where we struggle on an emotional level, where we can't find the strength to get up and put a smile on our face and function normally. Dichducha shal nefesh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu pushes the human being into this experience where all illusion of control, all of the words that fit into our minds are shattered. Tashev enosh adaka. Why would God do that? Why wouldn't God just give us everything we need all the time and spare us from this experience of the visceral, raw, nauseating, grotesque darkness that we feel when we lose someone we love, that we feel when we enter into a period of grieving? And David HaMelech answers the question in the next 3 words in the verse. Vatomer, because in pushing the human being into dichducha shal nefesh, what is God doing? 3 words. Shuvu b'nei Adam. Hashem says, Shuvu b'nei Adam, return to me. Meaning to say, on the deepest level, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in pushing us to the point where all of our categories bend, and then break with a cataclysmic explosion, pushing us into a place of endless darkness, where we have this sense of emotional vertigo, and up is down and down is up, and we feel completely and utterly lost. Tashev enosh adaka, adichducha shal nefesh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, human being, you're a spark of the divine. You have within you a little bit of a spark of infinity. That means you're a part of godliness. Even though right now you look in the mirror and you see your human form, and you feel and you taste and you smell and you see, and we don't see Hashem, we experience the limited physical world. Hashem says you can have an opportunity to transcend your humanness, your limitation. Shuvu b'nei Adam. Hashem says to the spark of divinity within us, return from the aspect of b'nei Adam, from our limited experience of our humanity, where we think we're in control and we scramble to find ways to fortify that illusion of our being in control. Hashem says, I'm going to gift you with an opportunity of grief, to experience the most confounding darkness, the deepest question marks to which there are no answers. Stoik, into a realm where the only response is silence. Dichducha shal nefesh, because v'ataymer shuvu b'nei Adam, that will grant you the opportunity through that shtika, in a conscious way, kach Allah b'machshava, so that we can connect to the Master of heaven and earth with a deeper emunah than before. That doesn't mean that God, I believe that God will always do what I want him to do. That's not what emunah is. Emunah is that God will always do what he wants to do. And that he knows in a way that I do not know, cannot know, will not know, all the while that I'm still in this human body. So then how can I connect to it? Not with any words, with silence. Kach Allah b'machshava. This is how we rise. Shuvu b'nei Adam. This is how we utilize this as an opportunity to fortify the underlying consciousness that should sit at the foundation of each and every Jewish mind and heart. That really, in truth, ein lanu al mi lehisha'ein. There is no concept to lean on. He is in control. Ein oid malvadoi. He is all there is. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say if you find yourself in the early days, or even in later days when the grief wakes up again, and we thought that we were okay, and then we just find ourselves crying in public, and so overwhelmed by darkness that we can't perceive how to carry on. Remember that sitting with that can be a profoundly elevating, spiritual, beneficial experience. Even though it would appear that the right thing to do is to quickly run again to some kind of concept, to cosmetically cover over what we're feeling and get back out there. No. Sit with it without any concepts. Stoik. It's trouble. Get you into prayer. Meaning the deepest emunah there is. Tashev enosh adaka. V'taymer shuvu b'nei adam. Kach ala b'machshava. That's step one. I did want to share two concepts for those who are at the stage where they're ready to hear some concepts, some ideas that may help us to carry on, even though ultimately the fundamental answer of why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people and why Hashem does what he does is ultimately the infinite mystery. But here are two different perspectives that some might find helpful. The first is from the Baal HaTanya, Schusia Ganalenu, the first Rabbi of Lubavitch. And the Baal HaTanya writes in Igaris HaKodesh, a collection of his letters, Ois Yud Aleph, in the 11th letter. It's a very famous piece in Chabad Chasidus. It's called Lahaskilcha Bina. But the Rebbe intends to give us the crux of Jewish wisdom, which is related to the first point. And the tzaddik says like this. The Gemara tells us, Kol mada avid rachmana letav avid. Whatever Hashem does is for the best. Now that's already a concept. Right? So in the first step, we're not ready for. Just to sit and to feel in silence. But the Gemara tells us, and this is what we believe, that whatever Hashem does is for the best. Ultimately, it is for our good. And there are different ways of understanding this. It's a kapara, it's a tikkun, etc., etc. But we know that whatever we experience is for the best. Kol ma, which means in a literal translation, whatever, right? Kol ma, whatever, every what, right? Kol ma, whatever. The Avid Rahmana that God does, letav avid. But we can also see the word ma as representing the greatest, deepest, most fundamental form of question. When you ask the question, who, that's already with some information that we're asking about a person. So we say, who is the person? When we say where, we already have some information because we're talking about a place and we just don't know which place. Or which. It's talking about an object, we don't know which one. But the question, what, is the most fundamental question there is. Means we lack even the basic information about the topic that we're inquiring about. What? That's the question, ma. Sometimes when we experience darkness, we can't even say questions like who or where or which. It's just much more existential. What? Mazeh. What is happening here? Ma. What is it? So the Gemara is telling us, Kol ma. The deepest, most profound, most fundamental questions that God produces in our minds, the concept is letav avid. It's for the best. So the Baal HaTanya says like this. He says, if we could understand the goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us, and I bless us all that we should experience so many moments in our lives where it's abundantly clear Hashem is giving us blessings. Whether it's parnasa, whether it's good health, whether it's smachot, simchas in the family, good news that we hear, joyous occasions. Says the Baal Tanya, well, surely that's latav avid, obviously, so that's for the good. But the Baal Tanya says, what level of goodness is that? He says, if we're able to understand something as being overtly good, then it can't be that good. Because if our puny minds are able to comprehend the goodness of a thing, and it can fit into our categories where we get it, we look at it, we point our finger, we say, this thing that's happening in my life is good. The Baal Tanya says, well, it's certainly good because it's for sure included in Kol Mada Aved Rachmana L'Tav Aved, that whatever God does is for the best, and you can understand it, you can see it, it's certainly good. But the Baal Tanya says, you know what's the much greater level of good, saturated with so much more goodness? It's a counterintuitive thing. But the tzaddik says when we experience things in our lives that don't appear to be good, that's a deeper level of good. Because it's so good that our minds lack the capacity to get it. It's so good. This is a very, very deep concept to contemplate when we're ready for it. If we're not ready for it, don't listen to the rest of the shiur. Just after a half hour, that's where you're at. But if you're ready for words, if you're ready for concepts, this is an incredibly powerful one. The deeper the pain, the more confounding the loss, the better it is. Because we live in such a limited, pigeonholed, tiny little tunnel vision of a consciousness. When the creator of all, who's within all and above time, keeping track of every single detail of every single cheshbon from the beginning of time to the end of time, whatever he does is for the best. And the less we're capable of getting that, the more profound and the more deep this goodness must be. Because that's why it transcends our intellect in such an incredibly deep way. And there's a mashal that I once heard. A tzaddik was giving nechama to a person, trying to comfort them after they had lost something. And he said, when a person goes to a donor, person's collecting on behalf of this organization or that organization, or a mashulach, a person that's going door to door asking for some cash for whatever purpose. If he knocks on the door of a wealthy person and the person hears his story and says, do you happen to have $3 or £3, wherever you're, 3 shekel, wherever you live? So the pauper who's standing at the door is able to understand, well, he wants 3 from me because he's going to give me 5. He's going to give me a $5, right? He's going to give me $5 or £5. And so I'll have made 2. And that's better than 1. If the pauper goes to the next house over and the person at the door says, do you happen to have $6? He understands that the person intends to give him a $10 bill. He's going to make double what he made at the previous house when he only gave 3. Now he's giving 6. He's going to get 10. If he goes to the next house and the person says, might you happen to have $10? He's giving 10. He knows he's going to get a 20. And so it goes on and on and on. The person asks him for $60. He's getting a $100 bill. So the tzaddik explained it's the same thing with the master of heaven and earth. It's not the good things that we experience that are good, even though they certainly are, and we enjoy them, and we experience them, and we ask Hashem that everything should be with revealed goodness, and all the tikkunim should be made without any need for an experience of illusional pain. But the way it really works is that whatever Hashem is taking from us, that's how much more we're going to be getting And the greater the sense of loss, it's just the more change we're giving. And so if we give 3, we're getting 5. And if we give 6, we're getting 10. And if we give 10, we're getting 20. And if we give 60, we're getting 100. And this is a deeper way of understanding Kol ma da'avid rachmana l'tav avid. So the good things that I could understand, I give a little bit, so I get a little bit. But when a person experiences profound loss, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fixing things up for that person, fixing things up for the world. And the more confounding and the less comprehensible, the better it's going to be. The better it's going to be. If not in this world, then in the next. For all eternity, for all parties involved. And I want to leave you with one last thought. You know, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Loi amos ki echya. I shall not die, I shall live. Va'asaper ma'aseka, and I shall tell the stories of God. So on a simple level, it means that David HaMelech intends to devote his life to teaching about Hashem, and there are so many psukim about that. David's whole thing was Saper B'goyim Es Kavoidai. He wanted to declare Hashem's greatness and tell the stories of the miracles that Hashem has done for the Jewish nation and that He's done and continues to do for the whole world. That's what it means on a simple level. Loi amos, I shall not die. Ki echya, I shall live. And what shall I do with my life? Va'asaper masika. But a deeper level of interpretation is not that David will use his life to tell stories about Hashem, but that the deepest definition of what it means to be alive, Loi amos ki echya, what it means to live, is in living, va'asaper ma'aseka. There is a story that God is telling through me. Not that I will tell the story, but that in living, God is telling His. Loi amos ki echya va'asaper ma'aseka. It's all a story that God is telling. If a story doesn't contain any jagged edges, ups or downs, nothing happens, no rocks are skipped across the face of this very placid lake, and everything just goes as it's supposed to go, it's not so clear that that story is being told. The personality of the one who's telling the story doesn't come through because there's nothing to it. There's no awareness of the visceral experience of the storyteller. But David HaMelech says, if I'm alive, and my life, with everything that David HaMelech went through, and everything that all of our tzaddikim went through, the suffering, the confounding levels of suffering, if my life is the story of the divine, then loy ha-mesim yahaluka. Then the dead, the ones who we don't sense God's story flowing through, don't have a reason to praise. Don't have a reason to recognize the hashgacha, the presence of the divine. Loy ha-mesim yahaluka. It's only va'anachnu. It's those who are awake to the story that's being told. Those who are woken up by the storyteller when the fundamental plot shifts, sometimes without warning, who are able to live a life of awareness of and praise for the Master of heaven and earth. Like David HaMelech says, va'ani tefillah. Not that I pray, but David HaMelech says, I am a prayer. My whole being exudes faith, emunah, awareness, expanded consciousness, what's called mochin, the godless, a higher expanded state of living. the difference between being awake and living a dream. Sometimes the storyteller shakes us awake. And when he does, David HaMelech is able to declare, Oid chaki ani sani. I thank you because you caused me to suffer. Because of the opportunity that you gift me to remember what life really is. Not to fall asleep. To emulate God's wakefulness, the way in which God neither sleeps nor slumbers, by neither sleeping nor slumbering ourselves, by being awake to the wakeful presence of God in the world, and to know that this life is fleeting, that this life is not all there is, that we're just down here for a short period of time, that each moment counts, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is begging us to wake up to a relationship with Him and to utilize the moments that we have, not one moment extra of which we shall live. Every person given the exact measure of life that they were always ever supposed to have, in line with the Kol Mada Avid Rachmana L'Tav Avid, with the great goodness of the divine that's incomprehensible, that sometimes we need to respond to with shtika, like we said in the beginning. Sometimes Hashem wants to wake us up, and a new plot line is added to the story. And sometimes it's a plot line of joy, and sometimes it's a plot line of yisurim, of suffering. But if we can tap into the energy of David HaMelech, who knew what life was all about, who knew how eternal buildings can be built in fleeting moments of faith, palaces forever and ever and ever, in a realm that's real, not the Alma de Shikra. David HaMelech, if we can tap into his energy, we can say, Oidcha, I thank you, Hashem, ki anisani, for the pain. Me'es Hashem hoisazos. Because if I'm awake to the story, and it's clear how much I'm not in control, then I'm gifted an opportunity to become awake to the storyteller in my life. Hashem's presence is hashgacha pratis. When odd things occur, the unexpected, it reminds me, Hashem is real. Hashem is in my life. Rabbi Nachman says so powerfully, the great tzaddik who taught the world never to give up and how to find the redeeming light of hope and joy within the deepest darkness. A tzaddik who lost 4 children and his first wife, who suffered horribly from tuberculosis for the latter half of his very short life, left the world at 39 years old with so much more to accomplish. Rabbi Nachman says in Sichas Haran, one of the books of his teachings, which I'm privileged to give shiurim on weekly, the tzaddik says, when a person loses a child, he should remember, and this is his lashon, mi lakach mimeni ben. Who took that child from me? Haloi Hashem yizbarach. That is not the place where God is least. That might be the most profound encounter I'll ever have with the divine. Because his hashgacha pratis is so particular that it was he, b'chvoido va'atzmai, like it says by Mitzrayim, ani v'loi malach, ani v'loi shliach, ani v'loi saraf, anihu v'loi acher. Hashem descended into my life and took something from me. A close encounter. Kishalei keach, Rabbi Nachman says, when it's taken from me, mimeni brius gufi, and I lose my health, chas v'shalom, milakach. Who took it away? Whose hand descended into my life to lovingly caress me on the cheek while shaking my shoulder to wake me up to the deeper story that he's telling through me, while taking something from me because that's the way that he intended to gift me with an opportunity to wake up? Mi lakach, Hashem nasan. Hashem gives, v'Hashem lakach. And Hashem takes. Sarah Imenu recognized this. She recognized this after decades and decades and decades of the deepest suffering, knowing she was meant to be the matriarch of the Jewish nation, and it didn't happen. And finally, in her moment of Pekida, Vashem pakad es Sarah, in that moment when she's finally gifted with the child that she prayed for so many years, Sarah Imenu says, Tzchaik asali Elokim. God has made laughter for me. And the Heilige Kedusha Slevi, the Berditchever Rav, asks, Tzchaik asali Elokim? The name Elokim has provided laughter for Sarah? We know that the name Elokim connotes the midah of din, strict, harsh judgment. Wouldn't it be more appropriate for Sarah to say, Tzchaik asali, laughter was caused to me by Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, by Hashem? The midah, the trait of chesed, of kindness? Why does she say Tzchaik asali Elokim, the midah of din? Says the Berditchever Rav, when a person reaches an expanded level of consciousness, when the salvation comes, which in the context of loss will be Tchias HaMesim, which will be very soon, Olam Haba, accessing the other side of the tapestry, the place where there are only answers and no questions, not like our realm where there's only questions and no answers. When a person gets to that place, they'll be able then to turn around and look at all the Elokim, look at all the din, the concealment, the darkness, the pain, to point at it and to say, whoa, my salvation, my joy is not despite that experience, but specifically because of that experience. Tzchaik asali, the reason why I have this level of joy is because of Elokim, is because of what I went through, is because of the suffering, because of the opportunity to sit with it in silence, like we learned, or the capacity to experience the deepest goodness that's beyond what our minds are able to comprehend, or the ability to wake up and to remember that life is a story, that each moment counts. The opportunity to engage with emunah for real, to understand Hashem cares about me so deeply that He didn't just leave me alone. He descended into my life and He made a change, and the plot shifted and the story changed and a new chapter began. Tzchaik, the greatest gift of laughter, asali, Elokim. It was specifically Elokim, because it helped us to become more and more and more wakeful. It was part of our story. Not because we did something wrong, not because we're at fault, not because Hashem is punishing us, chas v'shalom, but because this is how our story already is, already was. Hashem is Haya Hova V'Yiyah. There's a whole book with our name on it, long before we're born. And then God reads that story. This is always how it was ever going to be. There is no fluke, there is no mistake. Loi amos ki echya. As long as I'm alive, va'asaper masika. So eventually when we get to the point where we look back and we say, B'shuv Hashem es shivas tzion. When we return to our inner Yerushalayim, to the place of Yira Shlema, to the place of absolute total awareness of the divine. B'shuv Hashem es shivas tzion, we say, oh my gosh, hayinu kechalmim. I was schluffing, I was sleeping life away. And God reminded me about mortality. God reminded me about what's important in life. God reminded me about how deeply I love those that I could very easily, chas v'shalom, lose. I ought to invest in those relationships more deeply. I ought to take life more seriously. I ought to remember that this is not forever. Hayinu kechalmim, I'm awake now. in a way that I wasn't then. I was dreaming. As at that moment, Yemali Schaik Pinu, like Sarah Imenu, Schaik Asali, then we will shake with an eternal laughter, with the awareness that we never could have had in this world, that we suffered so much from not knowing. Then we will gain access to the other side of the tapestry, where the flip side, which we're privy to now, is just a bunch of tangled, unseemly threads. It looks like a mess. But at that point, when everything is flipped around, we say, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. The grand weaver was weaving the most glorious tapestry of light all along. He was waking us up from our dream. He was pushing us into darkness to force us to find the light. And my bracha is to all of us collectively, we should merit this as a nation, that all of the tsaras, all of the pain that we're experiencing should be wiped away. That Am Yisrael should return to Yerushalayim, b'chol leiv u'b'chol nefesh koyim miyas la'artzeinu, standing up tall and proud, so that we can experience collectively a national hayinu kecholmim, a national waking up from the dream of everything that we experienced throughout our history. And as Yimali Schaik Pinu, we should laugh, then we should laugh. But on a more specific level, to each and every one of you who are watching this, Hamakom Yinachim Eschem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should fill your heart with the deepest comfort, with the comfort of Hamakom. Wherever you are, you're in Him. There is no falling out, there is no being pushed out. It's just being pushed, if we're pushed, deeper and deeper and deeper into the light. This is part of our story, and we are all a part of His. Lai amos ki echya. We should only hear good news. We should only experience life and health and vitality and hope, so that we can continue to tell the story of the divine, to continue to be megala kvod shemayim, to reveal the presence of godliness within ourselves, to help other people reveal it from within themselves, so we can all collectively wake up to the divine energy in everything. So that we can come back to Yerushalayim, the Bias Goel Tzedek, with the coming of our righteous Redeemer Mashiach Tzedkenu, b'mheira b'yameinu, amen v'amen. U'macha Hashem dima, may al kol panim, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu wipe away the tears from upon every face. Thanks for listening.